everyone for coming out. This is a nice attendance. We've been wanting to do this for a while, just talk about all the rules and to try to get everyone together on the same page so we avoid accidents. I think the number one thing is in ice boating is you don't use rules for tactics. That's probably the big thing. You use the rules to stop hitting each other and killing one another and damaging things. And that's probably the biggest difference between softwater sailing and hard water sailing. Rules really can be used in softwater sailing to gain positions, where in ice boating it can be real dangerous to do it. And there's several rules that are very different than softwater sailing. I'll make sure this crew will go through it. But just a very elementary process to talk about the course and racing. So first of all, in the pits, all the boats will tend to gather in the pits, and you should try to stay with your fleet enough so you can help each other and get massed up and get massed down. Try to pay attention to the wind at the end of the day and what it's going to do overnight, so you can put your ice screws in or position your boat the best so it's not going to blow over. Try not to buzz the pits if you're just sailing around, because people have dogs and people on ice skates can shoot out pretty quickly, and so buzzing the pits at high speed is a little dangerous. And then sailing in and out, probably the most important, sailing in and out of the pits is really not a great idea. When I went to the B-Skeeter myself, in one weekend I hit 2 boats sailing into the pits, so I don't do that anymore. And it's a safe thing when you're lining up. Also, make sure people have enough room to get out. Don't trap people in when you're in the pits. Make sure that they can get out to the race course. So race course is a typical windward leeward. There's no triangle or Olympic sailing courses in ice boating. It's all straight up to a windward mark and then back down to a leeward mark. There's a starting line, and that starting line is perpendicular to the wind, and we line up on marks that are actually paced off. And so these are all paced off at a certain angle, and typically you will move the boat on one side. You have the numbers of 1, 3, 5 that will be going off onto port tack. On starboard tack it'd be 2, 4, and 6. Person will start by raising a flag. We'll go out here so everyone can see him. We'll actually raise up a flag and say, ready on the right, ready on the left, flag is up, and then we'll shoot it down, and that's the key that you can start running and jumping into your boat. Go ahead.
And the flag is the signal, not the noise. Just like this flag is the signal. So if the guy says nothing and drops the flag, you go. Don't be looking down, waiting for somebody to yell or make noise. Watch the flag.
So usually you draw for the first positions when the first race starts, and you're assigned a position. After that, it's the positions that you take are the positions you finished in. Again, this would be 1, 3, and 5, 2, 4, and 6. And when you're starting, and in this sequence here, everyone wants to line up, and the guys at the 1 and 2 position pretty much set what the angle that they're going to come off the mark at. You can see at this point here, this number 2 boat here, or 3 boat, I'm sorry, at this mark, is pointed much higher up into the wind as this is. This boat needs to lay off and pick up and turn his boat away so there's not a collision that comes into here. So always look to the always look to the windward boat to see what their angle is and try to adjust it to match his. So as you're running off, you don't end up colliding. And sometimes the starter will actually ask you to call off your sail number and have you lay off as well. You line up your windward runner right next to that, and that's how you, right next to the marker that's put in, and that's how you line up your boats going out. So once the race is started,
Just one thing to finish on there is that the race committee can tell you, but they're not in the best position to see if somebody's pointed up too high.
Yeah.
It's the sailor above you that is gonna indicate to you that you need to lay off more, and you do have to comply. You can't say, well, I can run faster than you, so I'm gonna push straight upwind. You have to lay off.
Where is that in the rules?
It's in National Iceboat Authority, Part 2, Management of Races. Race committee shall check all yachts are laid off similarly at the start. Also in Part 4 of the National Iceboat Authority, C1, a skipper can demand that your neighbor be laid off similarly.
Holy cow. Perfect.
Good job. It's the anti-rule.
Any other discussion on that, just, real quick, go ahead?
The one little battle that I have with me being only 150 pounds, a lot of times you got a pretty windy, it's pretty hard to lay off.
Yeah. Yes,
And
that's,
hold the boat back.
Right,
Yeah.
One thing to mention, layoff also sounds like F-offs.
right.
Say it loud enough.
You gotta find-
We've had people storm off the course because they thought someone was telling them to
Yeah.
F off and not to lay off. Okay. All right,
true story.
true story. Any other discussion just at the start, anything that we can bring up? So one of the things you can see is if you're in a position where you're starting on the starboard and you're heading off to starboard, one of the things that's different in ice boating than saltwater sailing is you don't tack on a lot of shifts, because in ice boating it's really hard to understand if you're in a lull or if you're in a true shift, and the boats are so fast and the tacks are so expensive for speed that you'll typically see that all of these boats that are heading off to the starboard ley line will go all the way to the starboard ley line, almost 100% of the time. It's a real rarity that someone, and what they'll do is they may have sailed the course beforehand, and then they'll pick their position to go over and to the windward mark. The obviously disadvantage of the boats heading off on starboard is they're gonna have potentially one extra tack than their partners. For me, with ice boating, what's really important is to be able to come into the windward mark fully loaded for the day and the conditions, and in a position to be able to bear off smoothly. Because as you go from a close hauled tight position and you start to move through the reaches to a broad reach, the boat really loads up. Most of you that have done this know this. The boat will really load up. It has a tendency to hike up, and to control that, you can either dump the sheet or you can continue to go downwind to ease the load. And this is really critical in this point to have room and have speed. So I think coming into the windward mark with top speed is important. And because of that, one of the things a lot of people do in saltwater sailing is hit the port ley line. That's not a bad thing, so you're not all stacked up in a queue coming into the starboard mark. But in ice boating, it doesn't make a great deal of sense, because if you come up here and turn, you're gonna kill your speed and all that it takes to start to get that momentum going downwind. And so I think it's a pretty decent rule or tactic to not bang that starboard ley line right away. And also, if you do get a shift, you are able to take advantage of it if you've tacked it, somewhere 50% or 2/3 up the line. And then coming down, the same thing that goes with the leeward mark rounding, which will probably encompass a ton of our discussion, is these boats really are going fast at this time. And when you're going to take them from a broad reach up to close hauled again, they really go through a lot of load. They're really, you'll skid out quite a bit, and trying to keep your runners from skidding and trying to keep the boat down and not out of control requires you to sheet it out and to take big wide turns into it, and not try to stuff it in on like an overlap that you do in saltwater sailing. So those are kind of the the first lap around the course. That's a little bit of what the difference is between hard water, soft water sailing. And I think what we should do now is just you know, these guys, we can go through definitions and start to take ourselves through that course again. And the last thing I'll say about the weirdness of ice boating is it's really hard to see to the south. And I think that's important to mention. I think it's really hard to see to the south if you've got, and if you're, particularly like when we're on Geneva and we usually are on a west or northwest type breeze, it's wicked hard if there's a lot of sun out and glare to see to the south. And so when you're coming up on a bunch of starboard tackers here, you know, to that starboard ley line and they're all over, they can't see you very well. And they can't really judge your distances and the rest.
Underneath your boom, right, you can't see under.
And
Just
into
the glare.
sun, the glare.
And
Just the
sun.
glare, because the sun sits so low. And it can really harm your vision. And it's something to be, and that's the other reason is if you have a tendency to come up here, you're on the port tack, and these guys, and this is a good definition of, this person's gonna be coming up to the windward mark on port tack right on the ley line, and there's other guys that are gonna come around, and they're gonna be on starboard. Well, this is the one instance that the rule changes on port starboard. The boat coming down has to keep clear of the boat that's coming upwind. That's one of the definitions, that's one of the different changes that goes on. But boy, if you're sneaking up this ley line, that's a recipe for a potential collision. If you've got, even if you have right of way, you know, and I think that's one of the things to remember is it's not always about whether you have right of way, it's about avoiding collisions. And I would just really stress, I think banging that port ley line is not a great move for a lot of reasons.